unveiling the most devastating pandemics in human history. The word pandemic might make you think of COVID-19, but believe me, the past has seen much worse pandemics than this. From the bubonic plague to smallpox, these pandemics have taken millions of lives. Enjoy this video as we unmask some of the most devastating pandemics that have left their indelible marks on human history. History's most devastating pandemics stand as haunting reminders of our vulnerability in the face of invisible adversaries. From the chilling grasp of the Black Death to the modern-day challenges of COVID-19, these pandemics have reshaped societies, shattered economies, and revealed our shared humanity's capacity for resilience. Ready to time travel through history and unveil the devastating effects of pandemics? Smallpox Pandemic. Let's set our historical compass back to a time when empires rose and fell, and one microscopic foe left an indelible mark on humanity: the smallpox pandemic. When civilizations were bustling with life lurking in the shadows of the Variola virus, the cunning culprit behind this ancient havoc. It had mortality rates that would make your jaw drop. Smallpox had a merciless grip, sweeping across continents, leaving communities shattered and grieving. It killed more than 250 million people during this span. Shocking, right? On one front, they were confronted with foreign powers, and on the other hand, smallpox ravaged their numbers, forever altering their destinies. People were pioneering new ways to fight back. Ever heard of variolation? It was like the historical version of vaccination. They would take a little bit of the virus, expose people to it, and hope their bodies would build a defense. Brave souls. Did you know that smallpox stayed for the longest period? It devastated the lives of people, with major outbreaks occurring over 300 years, from the 18th to 20th centuries. World Health Organization, WHO, led the charge to eradicate smallpox from the face of the earth. Fortunately, they were successful. Smallpox is no more, except for a few well-guarded samples in labs. The Black Death time to step into the eerie streets of 14th century Europe, where darkness and dread gave rise to the chilling legend known as the Black Death. But wait, this isn't some spooky ghost story. This is a real-life nightmare brought to life by a microscopic villain named Yersinia Pestis. Imagine a time of castles and cobblestones, where knights and peasants shared the stage of life. In the midst of all this, a silent intruder emerged from the shadows, the Black Death. The pandemic peaked in the mid-14th century and continued to impact various regions for several decades. Yersinia pestis, the bacteria responsible for this terror, swept through Europe like a sinister fog, sparing no one in its path. Towns and villages were struck down, leaving behind tales of heartbreak and despair. The Black Death had a mortality rate that would make any modern horror film pale in comparison. It spread quicker, leaving chaos and devastation in its wake. And let's talk about its impact. It had an estimated death toll of 150 to 200 million people. Economies crumbled like a house of cards, and social norms were upended. It was like hitting the reset button on an entire continent. But guess what? Our medieval ancestors weren't just twiddling their thumbs in the face of this grim reaper. They rolled up their sleeves and attempted to fight back. Quarantine zones were set up. Yes, quarantine is so old. These quarantines made today's stay-at-home orders look like a picnic. But all the deaths were not merely sacrificed in vain. It was the horrors of the Black Death that pushed human civilizations to build a stronger future. They sparked changes in medicine and public health that paved the way for modern healthcare systems. Let's fast forward to a time when the world was both at war and under siege by the Spanish flu. Don't let the name fool you. This wasn't some casual fiesta. We're talking about a full-blown pandemic by none other than the Influenza H1N1 virus. World War I was in full swing, and amidst the chaos and trenches, a different kind of battle unfolded. The Spanish flu, sneaky as ever, infiltrated armies and civilian populations alike, spreading like wildfire. As the name suggests, you might think that it might have originated in Spain, but it was just because Spain's open media coverage during wartime gave it the wrong spotlight. Spanish flu was a microscopic enemy, causing mayhem on a global scale. It infected people faster than you could say, pandemic panic. The pandemic lasted from 1918 to 1919. with some outbreaks extending into the early 1920s. The infection rate and death toll were staggering. It was like a global game of tag, but with a cruel twist. The estimated death toll was around 75 million to 100 million people. To your surprise, the young adults, who are usually resilient ones, were hit the hardest. The uncanny Spanish flu targeted those in the prime of their lives. Unfortunately, the medical understanding at the time was about as advanced as a horse-drawn carriage. We had limited medical technology and knowledge. Back then, medicine was like throwing darts in the dark. Doctors were doing their best, but they were essentially dealing with an invisible foe, armed with rudimentary tools. The Spanish flu shook the world awake, leaving behind a legacy of lessons learned. It kick-started a global push for pandemic preparedness, a wake-up call for nations to come together, share information, and collaborate in the face of such threats. The third cholera pandemic. Now let's dive headfirst into the murky waters of the 19th century, where an unwelcome guest named cholera crashed humanity. We are about to wade through the story of the third cholera pandemic. The 1800s were in full swing, and cities were expanding faster than the Industrial Revolution. But amidst this hustle and bustle, a villainous bacterium sneaked in. It spread like wildfire through contaminated water, turning the most basic necessity into a deadly weapon. Can you imagine? Something as innocuous as a glass of water could spell doom. But it wasn't just a sip of water, it was a sip of catastrophe. There is more to this. The third cholera pandemic played a major role in changing how cities were built. Urbanization was in full swing, but so was cholera. This pandemic occurred in multiple waves from the mid-19th century, beginning around 1852, through the late 1800s. It took the lives of almost 1 million people. The impact was profound. Sanitation became a hot topic, and cities started scrambling to reform their ways. Efforts to combat the disease were a mix of bravery and innovation. Dr. John Snow knew a lot about cholera. He was the unsung hero who cracked the code on transmission. His mapping of cholera cases in London pointed to a contaminated water source, proving that cholera wasn't a mysterious curse, but a sneaky microbe with a penchant for waterborne travel. Cholera isn't just a historical tale. It is the stubborn ghost that still haunts us today. Modern times haven't completely wiped it out. Cholera outbreaks are like echoes from the past, reminding us that despite our progress, we still have battles to fight. The third cholera pandemic wasn't just about sickness. It was a wake-up call for better urban planning and improved hygiene, which many countries are still lacking. HIV/AIDS pandemic. Decades back, a silent pandemic began to unravel the fabric of societies worldwide. The HIV/AIDS pandemic is a tale that's not only about a virus, but also the culture. The latter half of the 20th century was a time of disco, rock and roll, and big dreams. But amidst the neon lights, a new player emerged: the human immunodeficiency virus. It's a tale of cells and genes, where a tiny virus changed the world forever. It had a seismic shift. HIV/AIDS hit hard, tearing through communities with a relentless fervor. The pandemic emerged in the late 20th century, with the earliest cases detected in the late 1970s. It continues to impact the world today. It has taken the lives of around 36 million people across the globe, and still counting even today. People united, raising their voices for awareness, empathy, and change. The HIV/AIDS pandemic transformed public health policies and brought conversations about sexual health and safe practices into the spotlight. Access to treatment remains a challenge, a stark reminder that even in the face of progress, inequalities persist. And let's not forget about discrimination, a shadow that still lurks and affects those living with HIV/AIDS. These devastating pandemics echoed through time, leaving legacies of loss compelling us to unite, innovate, and prepare. If you enjoyed this journey into the realms of history, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more exciting expeditions through time.